I'm going to talk about Shakespeare's English, which sounds like a very serious kind of subject, but let's not make it too serious. Lighten it up a little bit. Here's Shakespeare looking a little bit less frightening, and perhaps we can even enjoy finding out a little bit about the way that he used the English language, which of course was a little bit different in those days from the English we have now. But, whoa, 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 whoa. Hey, what have we got here? This is Shakespeare. Shakespeare is here. He's talking to us. What's he saying? I wonder what he's saying. Do you know what he's saying? I know what he's saying. He's saying, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. All right, there's Shakespeare. That's how he talks, that's how he speaks, that's how he wrote and used the English language. The question is, can we, in, I don't know, half an hour, 40 minutes or so, can we get some kind of understanding of the way that he used English? Let's start. English, the English that we speak, that we learned in school. There's no problem with that, I suppose. I mean, at least we all know what it is. So let's just take a look at that and look at the Lord's Prayer, which is something we very often use when we want to compare different languages. And the Lord's Prayer begins with the words, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. That's in modern English. And if we look at that in Japanese, it's like this. Okay. All right, so the question is, what kind of English was Shakespeare using? Was it the same as modern English? What kind of English do you think Shakespeare used? Okay, let's take a look. Quite a lot of people tell me that Shakespeare spoke Old English and that his poems and his plays are written in Old English. So let's take a look at Old English. Here's that Lord's Prayer again. This time it's in Old English. And it's something like this. Feder urdu the ert on hevonem. Sidin nama gehalgod tobikum din rese geworde din villa in orphan sva on hevonem. Now, do you think that Shakespeare wrote and spoke Old English like that? Well, the answer is no. No, 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 he didn't. Obviously, his English was very, very different from that. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? You could understand that much more easily than you could understand Feder urdu the erton hevonum, which you wouldn't understand at all unless you knew the words in modern English, unless you had a translation. Shakespeare was born in 1564. He died in 1616. And Old English was spoken before the 11th century. That's like 500 years before Shakespeare was even born. All right, so he definitely didn't speak Old English. Let's take a look at something called Middle English. Here again we have the same Lord's Prayer in Middle English, and it looks like this. Our Father that art in heavenes, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come not to, be thy will done in earth as it in heaven. I'm not sure if my pronunciation is quite right, okay? That's Middle English, though, all right? So, again, would we say that that's what Shakespeare spoke? Not really, is it? Actually, Middle English died out about 1450, a couple of hundred years before Shakespeare, 100 years or so before Shakespeare was born, and people then began speaking something called early modern English. Let's take a look at early modern English. Okay, so let's look at early modern English. Here is the Lord's Prayer in early modern English. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Well, as we can see, that's not really all that different from the English that we speak today. Let's look at the modern version again. We've got, Our Father, who is in heaven, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We can see a few words are different. All right, let's take a look at some of those differences. Our Father, which art in heaven. What do you think which art means? Well, compare it with the modern one. Instead of which art in heaven, in modern English we say who is. So there you go. Which art in early modern English is who is in our English today. What else have we got? Well, we've got thy name. Hallowed be thy name. Well, look at it. It's hallowed be your name, isn't it? There you go. Thy is your. We've got thy kingdom. And we can see that the spelling is just a little bit different from our modern spelling. Okay? And we've got in earth rather than on earth, because for them they thought of the earth is the place that we are in, and when we die we will be in another place, we will be in heaven. They didn't think of it so much as a round ball like we think of it today, a round ball, and we are on the edge of that round ball, we're on it. They thought of the earth as a place that included the sky, and we were in that space. So their way of thinking about it was just a little bit different from ours. Not so different, though. And then we've got heaven. Again, the spelling just a little bit different from our spelling today. They spelt it with a U. All right, so we've got these small differences. And basically, this is the kind of English that Shakespeare spoke. Okay, so we've got one or two little things that are different, and we're going to go through some of the grammatical differences before we go back and look at Shakespeare's poem. So we're going to study a little bit about Shakespeare's English. Okay. Let's start with the question of whether you know any Shakespeare. Is there any Shakespeare that you've heard before? Any famous words by Shakespeare? I expect quite a lot of people are going to say to be or not to be. That is the question. The very famous words spoken by Hamlet. Well, that's actually exactly the same as the English we use today, isn't it? There's no difference. Okay? When Hamlet is trying to decide to take revenge, he says, to be. Okay? Well, we have that today, of course, in our English. Not to be, we have that. And that is the question. It's all exactly the same as the English we speak today. But, sometimes it's a little bit different from our English today. And let's go back to that poem that we listened to at the beginning there. Shakespeare was talking to us saying, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate." Well, again, there are some small differences there, aren't there, between the English we use today and the English that Shakespeare's using there. Let's take a look at the differences. He says, "Shall I compare thee?" Well, we saw that the word for you is different, and in this case, thee, when it's the object. All right? We had your, thy, and we've got thee, which is you, when it's the mokutekigo, the object of the verb. Shall I compare thee? Shall I compare you to a summer's day? All right? And then we've got thou art more lovely and more temperate. Here, thou is the shugo. Thou art, you are. All right? So, shall I compare thee? Shall I compare you to a summer's day? Okay. Anata to natsu no hi wo kurabemashou ka? Okay, so shio. Tsumari, thou art more lovely and more temperate. You are more lovely. Anata no hou ga kirei. And more temperate. Motto yasashii. Okay, temperate is something like suzushi, but you can't really say that about a person, can you? So, motto yasashii. So it's very similar to our English, and we can understand it fairly easily if we change just one or two little things, especially the word for you. And we notice that the verb is a little bit different. Instead of you are, it's thou art. Okay, so let's look at the verbs and that kind of difference in a little bit more detail. So, Shakespeare's verbs were in some ways easier than the verbs we have today. We'll take a look at it. They're a bit different, okay? It's going to take some getting used to. Some of it was exactly the same as we use now. I am, for example, we are, exactly the same. But we notice that you was different, and so it's going to be thou art. And sometimes they would say also thou be. They used both of those. And in the plural, ye are, if it was more than one person, ye are. So that's a little bit different from today. And then if it's talking about another person, he is doing it, she is doing it, then it would be the same as today, except that they also would say he be or she be, and then they are the same as today. Let's look at another verb. And we find that a verb like go, I go, we go, was again very much like the English that we use today, except that they could also say I do go and we do go. And that meant something similar to I go or we go. They meant more or less the same thing. They also didn't use things like I am going. They would just say I go. All right? And we are going, we go. You were expecting it to be a little bit different, and yes, it's thou, of course, the word for you, when it's a shugo, when it's a subject, and notice how the verb ends in st, thou goest, means you go. And this st is a pattern. You'll find it all through the verbs in Shakespeare's English. When it's you, it's thou, usually, and then thou goest, thou dost go. And in the plural, ye go or ye do go, both meaning you go. And then also when it's somebody else doing it, he's doing it or she's doing it, that was also a little bit different from the way we use English today. We have the st when it's you, it's thou goest, but when it's he or she or somebody else doing it, it's she goeth, all right, or she doth go. All right, and in the plural, it would just be they go or they do go. So a little bit different from the way that we use verbs today. And then Looking at another verb, for example, live, I live, or I do live would mean more or less the same thing. And we live, we do live, more or less the same thing. Very similar to the English we have today, except that we can put do if we want to. It's kind of free. You, we expect to be different, and we expect that st, thou livest. All right? And ye, if there's more than one person, you people, ye do live, or ye live. Like that. And he or she would be he liveth, or he doth live, and they live, or they do live. So this would be the basic form of the verb. And if they wanted to make a question, well, with the verb to be in English today, I am becomes am I. We are becomes are we. You are becomes are you. They say thou art, so that becomes art thou. Okay? Or art thou, or be thou, because sometimes they would use be. So basically they just turned the subject and the object the other way round. Well, in modern English, we don't do that with most verbs. For example, we don't say go I, we say do I go. And in early modern English, the same way when it was I, they would usually say do I go, or we, do we go. But when it was you or another person, he or she, they would just turn the subject and the verb the other way round. So thou goest would be goest thou. They could also say dost thou go, do you go. So they had both ways of saying it. And again, he or she goeth, or goeth she. They could say it that way as well. Or just doth she go, does she go. And if we look at the verb to live, the same sort of pattern. Do I live, or do we live? If it was me or we, it's usually the same as modern English. But when it's you or he or she or somebody else, then you have two patterns. One pattern is the same as we have today. Dost thou live? In the same way as do you live? But also just turning the subject and the verb the other way round. So thou livest becomes livest thou. So you live you. All right, just to ask the question. In some ways that's easier than the way that we have it in modern English. Liveth he, does he live? So this was the kind of pattern that they had when they were using the question form in the verb. And in the past tense, I was, we were, the same as now. Then thou wert, thou wast, and ye were. These were a little bit different from today. The only one that's different here is the you. But in most verbs, we would find that the you part was different. For example, thou wentst, or possibly thou didst go. Both were used. They both meant you went. And she wenteth, or she did go, would mean she went. Okay? So they used both ways of saying the past, using wentst. Remember st for the second person of the verb. Thou wentst. And th, she wenteth, for the third person of the verb. All right? And with another verb, I lived, and we can also say, I did live. We lived, we did live. If it's you, it's thou livedst, thou didst live. And if it's more than one person, ye lived, or ye did live. And so that's with the st for you, for thou, and then with the th, he liveth. Sounds a bit odd, he liveth, right? He lived, he did live, for the third person of the verb. So these are the basic forms of the verb. To say negative forms was really quite easy. Instead of saying I don't like it, they just said I like it not. Instead of saying she doesn't love me, they said she loves me not. Only instead of loves, they used th instead of s. She loveth me not. Seek not to alter me would mean seek not, try not, don't try to alter me, don't try to change me, that sort of thing. So these were the different forms of the verb. So let's take a look now at some of the spelling differences. The main grammar difference that I wanted to focus on is the verb and the way of using the word you with thee and thou. The spelling is a little bit different from modern spelling. One thing is that it's more flexible, so that Shakespeare would even spell his own name differently sometimes. You find that we've got different signatures of his name. William Shakespeare here, William, you've got that extraordinary S at the beginning there. But can you see how it's different? Almost each time he writes it, the spelling, we've got S-A, S-H-A, K-S-P, E-R, E-A-R. All right, it's spelt, I think there are, yes, at least 6 or 7 different ways that Shakespeare had of spelling his name. So with that amount of flexibility, we can be a little bit imaginative when it comes to early modern English. There were some basic rules, and we'll try and go through them here. One of the basic rules was U and V. These days, U and V show 2 different sounds. But in those days, they used U at the beginning of a word. Sorry, I said it the wrong way around. They use V at the beginning of a word, and they use U in the middle of a word. So very would begin with a V, but every would have a U because the sound, it comes in the middle of the word. Up would begin with a V because it's at the beginning, and cup would be a U because it's in the middle of the word. So whether it was a U or a V, what was important was not the sound. Actually, they pronounced it the same as we pronounce it today. They said very, they said every, they said up, and they said cup. There wasn't any difference in the pronunciation, but the rule for spelling was V at the beginning and U in the middle of a word for both sounds. Okay? Sounds a bit odd, seems a bit odd to us, but that's the way they did it. I and J, well, they mostly didn't use the letter J, and they would write an I so that my name might become Yong. Yon. It looks like Yon, okay? Just might become Just. Looks like Just. But again, mostly the pronunciation was fairly similar to our pronunciation today. They didn't say project, they would say project, more or less the same way as we say it today. So although the spelling was a little bit different, the sound J was the same as today, but spelled with an I usually. What else? Well, another important difference is the S, the letter S. They made a difference between what they called a short S, which they showed as an S, and a long S, which they showed as something that looks more or less like an F, like the F in food or fire. So that we would get words like busy, all right, with an F-like S. Please, the S looks like an F. Sleep, again, the S looks like an F. Now they could write it with the other S if they wanted to. It was flexible, but very often they would use this S that looks like an F. And there wasn't any capital form of this, so the first letter of Spain would be the same as it is today if it was a capital, and they didn't use it at the end of a word either, so that if it was something like process, for example, the last S would have to be a normal S. Okay, now the next difference is extra letters that got added to a word. The letter E especially was often added to a word, so that you might see a word, well, you can see there sleep, all right, S-L-E-E-P, and then with another E thrown on the end. Why? Just for good luck, really. And the same with I-E. Instead of Y, you might often get I-E. So keep with an extra E, say with an extra E, or say. You could change the Y into an I. Complain with the Y changed to the I changed to a Y, and then an extra E added in. Dog with two G's and an E. All right, they were pretty flexible about spelling. These things could be spelt the way we spell it today, but they could also spell them in different ways, such as these. So the important thing is that we don't have to spell the same way as they did, but we can recognize the way they spelled these words. And the letter W was also often written as two V's. All right, they would write it VV, so that you'd see something like where would be V, V, okay, two V's together. Nowhere, the same thing. Flowing, all right. So they would have these kinds of differences between their English, their spelling, and our spelling. There are other differences, but these are the more important ones. So, well, that's been quite tough, hasn't it? Now, let's see if we can have a little bit of fun ourselves. I would ask you to stop the recording at this point, turn it off, or leave it on pause or whatever, and have a go and see if you can write some Shakespearean English. Messages in early modern English. Okay? Be flexible. Feel free. Feel free to write your own messages in early modern English in the way that you like. Just experiment with it. For example, how would you say she loves me? The verb would be different, wouldn't it? She loveth me. And love could be written, very often would be written with a U instead of a V, wouldn't it? Loveth. All right? Have some fun. Try and make some sentences like anything you like. All right? Just play around with it. Remember, they were more flexible, they were more imaginative than we are today in their spelling, so it doesn't matter too much if you make some mistakes. So pause the video and go ahead, have your own little practice. Okay, did you do that? Did you have some practice? Good. Now let's take a look at that sonnet 18 that we started with right back at the beginning of this video. We've got, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Shall I compare you to a summer's day? Remember, anata to natsu no hi o kurabemashou ka. Okay? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Okay? So, hai, kurabemashou. Anata no hou ga kirei. Anata no hou ga yasashii. You are more lovely. You are more temperate than a summer's day. So, when he carries on and says, rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, all right, what do you think he's talking about? Logically, he would be comparing this person to the summer's day, and this would be more details of the comparison. He could be talking about the person who is more lovely and more temperate than a summer's day, or he could be talking about the summer's day itself. and saying, rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. What do you think? Do you think he's talking about the person who is more lovely and more temperate than a summer's day? Or do you think he's talking about the summer's day itself? Let me give you a hint. Aha! Do you get it? Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May. Well, they're not, I'm sorry, I couldn't get a picture of very English looking trees. Those are palm trees, look a bit tropical. But what we can see is that even if it's summer, even if it's the darling buds of May, it's Gogatsu, which is the early part of summer in England, and even at that wonderful time, rough winds may come and shake the darling buds, the little flowers that are trying to come out. Okay? So even if it's summer, it's not always perfect. And the next line, summer's lease hath all too short a date. Summer's lease, the lease is the kind of the money that you pay on renting a house or something like that. So it's a kind of keiyaku, chintai no keiyaku, the lease. And it's too short. So in a way, Natsu has its kind of chintai no keiyaku, to stay in the world. It's got its lease to stay in this world for a couple of months, for maybe May, June, July, August, if we're lucky, a bit of September. That's kind of summer. So that's the period that is contracted. But that contract, that time that summer has, is too short. All right, summer ends. I should say here that Japanese people tend not to like the summer very much because they feel that it's too hot. But an English summer is more like a Japanese spring. So for English people, summer is a kind of time that they wait for, a time that they hope for, a time that they enjoy when it comes, because most of the rest of the year it's fairly cold, quite often cloudy. So they really love those warm summer days. Even so, sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, he says. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines. What do you think the eye of heaven is? Okay, I'll give you another hint. That's right. The eye of heaven is the sun. And sometimes it shines too hot. Okay? And often is his gold complexion dimmed. So talking about the sun here, the eye of heaven, sometimes it's too hot. And sometimes its gold complexion, okay, its golden face, is dimmed, is clouded. All right? Its gold complexion is dimmed. Okay, what does this mean? Well, here you go. A summer's day, even if it's a summer's day, it may be pretty bad weather. It may be cloudy, it may be miserable. And so the gold complexion of the sun is dimmed. And every fair, that is every beautiful thing, from fair sometime declines. つまり、すべてのきれいは、きれいなことは、きれいからいつか落ちる。Every beautiful thing will one day stop being beautiful, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. So, some unlucky accident will destroy its beauty, or just leave nature to continue, and it will grow old just by itself, and it will stop being beautiful. So, 今まで so far, we've got, these are the things that are wrong with a summer's day. These are the problems, all right? Rough winds, too short, too hot, too cloudy, and anyway, it's going to finish. Every beautiful thing will finish. So this is the topic for the first 8 lines of the sonnet. Now he says, though, thy eternal summer shall not fade. Okay, now here is he talking about the summer, okay, a summer's day, or is he talking about the beautiful person who is more lovely and more temperate? He's talking about the person, isn't he? Your eternal summer, your never-ending summer. Here it is, your eternal summer shall not fade, like this, forever and forever and forever. Your summer will go on. つまり、あなたはいつまでも綺麗。You will never stop being beautiful. It will always be perfect summer. Thy eternal summer shall not fade. You will always be beautiful. Nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Thou owest means thou ownest, thou hast, you have. That fair you have, that beauty that you have. You will not lose possession of that beauty you have. You will always be beautiful. And nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade. Death will not be able to say, I have this person belongs to me, this person is dead. Death will never be able to say, I have you. You are perfect forever. You are always beautiful. You never die. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade. Is this possible? Thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade. Can these things be possible? Can a person be beautiful forever? Can a person have an eternal summer, never die? Is this possible? How is it possible? Shakespeare says, you will never die when in eternal lines to time thou growest. What is he talking about? What eternal lines are these? What eternal lines can he possibly be talking about? In eternal lines to time thou growest. You keep on growing more beautiful, more beautiful. You live forever. You are always perfect. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this. And this gives life to thee. What is this? What are these eternal lines? What is this that gives life to thee? What is it that gives life to you? You, perfect person, you who never die. Here's the hint. Have you got it? Do you understand what the eternal lines are? Do you understand what it is when he says, this, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee? Do you know what he's talking about? Yappari. He's talking about the eternal lines of poetry, of his poem. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this poem. And this poem gives life to thee. You can be beautiful hundreds of years later in Japan, in another country, or across the world, anywhere, as long as men can breathe to read the poem or eyes can see to see the poem, this poem lives on. And as long as this poem lives, so you live and so you are beautiful inside this poem. Have you got it? Do you understand it? I hope that this little video has shown you some things about Shakespeare's English and helped you to understand his most famous sonnet. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Okay, so that's it. That's the end of this little lesson on Shakespeare's English.